Calling the roll, Ms. Brown? Mr. Hauser?
Here.
Ms. Simon? Simon is absent at the moment. Ms. Baker?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Tuma?
Here.
Mr. Gallagher?
Here.
Mr. Schron?
Here.
Ms. Conwell?
I'll take that.
Mr. Jones?
It's okay.
Council President Brady?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Clerk,
You scared the boss off.
public comments.
Yes, I do have, I think, 6 persons who wish to address council. The first is Ms. Linda Mayer.
Hello, I'm Linda Mayer, and I'm speaking for the League of Women Voters. Members of the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland are very gratified to see that all of the members of the council have either sponsored or co-sponsored the Charter Review Commission's recommendation to make the Agency of Inspector General into a charter office. We've been advocating for a strong and independent ethics mechanism ever since our work on the Transitional Advisory Committee back in 2009. And we made then thereafter our own in-house study of government ethics the following year. Then we encouraged every step leading to the Inspector General Ordinance, which has been in effect now for about 6 years. And we followed the agency's operation under 2 different IGs. And we urged action by 2 successive charter review commissions for this amendment to see the light of day on the ballot in November. So we think now the time is really ripe to do it. We'd like the voters to see this and decide on it for themselves. The Charter Review Commission has framed a text for a new Article 15. They framed it very carefully with the aim of including all provisions needed for the IG to do the job independently and well. We urge County Council members in this discussion to keep this whole proposal intact. We believe seriously that if 1 or 2 of its provisions are weakened, the entire thing is weakened. The IG has to be free of political entanglements. It has to be insulated against attempts to weaken it. You wouldn't do that, but some council might. And it needs to be sufficiently empowered to perform his or her duties. No IG should have to turn to others to get the necessary tools, or no IG should have to ask for voluntary cooperation. And no IG ought to serve at the pleasure of the very officials who have the power to amend or repeal his or her ordinance. Yes, it may be true, we've heard the argument that it may be true the ordinance has been adequate so far, but the adequacy relies entirely upon the benign and cooperative attitude of the officials who would, after all, easily amend or repeal it. So we can't really improve upon the language of the rationale given by it's very convincing, and we thank you very much all for co-supporting it. We hope we can work together with you guys in order to support it in the election in November. Please put it on the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The next signed in.
Okay, first I'd like the record to reflect that Ms. Simon is present at the meeting. The next speaker is Catherine LaCroix.
Good afternoon. My name is Catherine LaCroix. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland and a resident of Council District 9. Today, the League is submitting a letter supporting 2 key recommendations of the Charter Review Commission. My comments are focused on the recommendation that the county receive specific authority to adopt campaign finance controls. All of us in this room know that we face a crisis in voter confidence in elected officials, and a key part of that mistrust centers on the influence of campaign contributions on the behavior of our duly elected representatives. State campaign finance law governs state-level campaigns. The City of Cleveland authorizes campaign finance measures in its charter, and by ordinance, the city has adopted specific campaign spending limits. Cuyahoga County alone has no campaign finance controls at all for county-level elections. The amendment would confer clear authority on the county to adopt appropriate measures. It does not specify what those measures would be. As a next step, citizens, good government advocates such as the League, and our public officials should work together through the legislative process to adopt specific ordinance language for Cuyahoga County elections. This is the second time that members of the Charter Review Commission have recommended this proposed amendment. We should trust their insight. The League of Greater Cleveland played an important role in the adoption of the current county charter and supports the charter's continued improvement. Our 500 local members take a keen interest in all issues of good government, and we strongly favor adding campaign finance language to the Cuyahoga County Charter. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
The next speaker is Catherine Terser.
Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Terser, and I'm so glad that I'm able to speak with you all today. I'm Common Cause Ohio's Executive Director, and before that, I was Ohio Citizen Action's Money and Politics Project Director. So I did a bunch of money and politics studies, including a fun one called the Enron Hot Potato, and a series of studies that looked at campaign contributions that went to candidates for the Ohio Supreme Court. Now, as you know, after a corruption scandal highlighting nepotism and kickbacks in 2009, Cuyahoga County voters took a really dramatic step and shook things up and created a new structure for government. But they didn't address money in politics. And that is often at the core of a problem. A study committee was created in 2010 to identify some campaign finance reform options with an intention of establishing rules to directly mitigate corruption. I served on this committee, this was in 2010, and it included people like the county prosecutor at that time, who was a guy named Bill Mason, and a bunch of different community leaders. We met over a 6-month time. Oh, by the way, I live in Columbus. During the winter, I would work my way up here to have conversations about money and politics. And we came up with some recommendations that were pretty straightforward. They focused on disclosure, they focused on contribution limits, and then we also included a recommendation for public financing. Now, unfortunately, these recommendations did fall on deaf ears. Now, when we think about 2010, we need to remember that that's actually the year of Citizens United versus FEC. Meaning that's the year that the courts, free speech, and all of a sudden there was all of this corporate money coming into elections at all sorts of different levels. And since 2010, since that time I started being on that committee, people have started to think about, what about money in politics? What can we do about this? And I think as we look at the recommendations that's before you, you're giving an opportunity to empower voters. I'd also like to highlight that free speech is really central to all campaigns. And when we think about free speech, we have rules in the public square, including the amount of time I'm given to speak. And I'd like to highlight that, free speech is important, but there are things that we can mitigate. For example, you can do quid pro quo. You can use quid pro quo. For example, you can have campaign finance limits. And in fact, the folks from Citizens United actually encouraged better disclosure. And so as we're thinking about the things that you can do, they're pretty small, but they make a difference. They're not going to root out all problems, but they will invest voters in having more faith. And you are given the opportunity to empower voters to say, we deserve better, and to call you all to action. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Will Tarter.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Baker, Council President Brady, County Council members, and fellow citizens. My name is Will Tarter. I'm the second Vice President of the Cleveland branch of the NAACP and a proud resident of Cuyahoga County District 6. Speaking as a private citizen, I want to first thank Judge Adrian and the members of the Charter Review Commission for their service. This bipartisan commission was comprised of respected leaders from former and current elected officials to labor, finance, academia, social services, and law. The commission members did not favor hastily adding campaign finance limits to the county charter, but instead unanimously favored charter language which codifies the ability for the county to pass similar legislation by ordinance. I urge this council to join the numerous public officials and community organizations who have endorsed this proposal and vote yes to support the CRC recommendation. Your vote today on campaign finance will send a message to the voters of Cuyahoga County. Voting yes would be a win-win for everyone. It would be a win for county government, as this would strengthen the county charter and send a clear message that this issue is of the utmost importance and it necessitates inclusion at the highest level of county government policy. It would be a win for county voters to make this statement as well. So why do this? Our county government is not even 8 years old, and public trust is fragile. Campaign finance is an important part of building that trust. The omission of campaign finance language in the county charter is unacceptable. Right now, there isn't even a minimum age limit to donate money to a county candidate. So instead of saying we've been told we can legally do this already, vote yes. And if voters approve the language, let's get moving on collectively deliberating together. Let's strengthen the charter, leaving no room for doubt or costly litigation. Instead of saying this is a solution looking for a problem, let's be proactive instead of reactive. Campaign finance is indeed like a Rubik's Cube. Yes, it is complicated, and not everything is in your immediate control. But remember, Rubik's Cubes can be solved. You must first align the colors that are within your reach, develop a strategy, and adjust as the situation changes. This charter amendment that's before you is the first turn in the alignment of the colors and pieces. We may not see the final product, but that does not mean today that council should not take the first step. This is a window of opportunity to strengthen the county charter, as another charter review commission will not be convened for 10 years until 2027. History is upon us. I urge you to vote yes, and let's continue to make this county stronger. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
County Prosecutor Michael O'Malley.
Good afternoon, County Council members. I'm here today on the proposed charter amendment regarding the Inspector General of Cuyahoga County. Each of you has received a briefing that I have prepared regarding my concerns regarding the charter amendment concerning the Inspector General. Certainly, I want to first and foremost say I support the concept of putting the Inspector General's position in the charter. I think it is critical to the future of this county that we continue to have an independent agency to investigate potential violations of the county code. But having said that, I just want to briefly go over my concerns that I've outlined in my letter. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. First and foremost, number one, the Inspector General cannot interfere in any criminal investigation. That is currently part of the criminal code. I don't know who wrote the current county proposed charter amendment, but much of the existing county code has been left out. This was a key portion of the existing county code. It's been left out of the proposed charter amendment. I'm not aware why. Same with number two. If they come across criminal activity, it needs to be immediately reported to a law enforcement agency. Again, that is not included in the proposed charter amendment. Issue 3 is not addressed in the current code, but it deals with advisory opinions. And I can only say as a result of the ongoing issues within Cuyahoga County, issues have arisen where opinions may have been authored that perhaps do not comply with what I believe to be the Ohio Revised Code. And I don't want to create any more hurdles in investigations. Currently, any county, any public employee can seek counsel from the Ohio Ethics Commission regarding potential conflicts of interest. When that opinion is authored by the Ohio Ethics Commission, it gives an employee safe harbor that they will not be prosecuted or that they cannot suffer any civil ramifications. I believe the current practice where advisory opinions are issued by our office by the Inspector General's office adds confusion to potential employees who have potential conflicts. I think when an employee has a potential conflict, the safest bet is take it to the Ohio Ethics Commission, where we will have uniform opinions throughout the state. I think it has the potential, as I've written, to create issues in the future. Number 4, independence. This applies to not just the Inspector General. I believe it applies to the Internal Auditor. Those agencies are both tasked with the requirement to investigate individuals and operations that fall underneath the county executive. I truly believe that we need an independent entity or agent to appoint both the Internal Auditor and the Inspector General to ensure that they will not be subject to undue influence. And we can talk about that further at a later date. I don't know that it's appropriate to talk about it further, but I think this county council needs to give some serious consideration into having an independent entity or individual appoint both of those individuals. There's been a complete change in the minimum qualifications necessary to be the Inspector General. I agree that it is important enough to put in the county charter. I don't agree that our best practice is to reduce the qualifications of this important position. They need to be able to analyze legal issues. They need to be able to understand constitutional issues. I just think the more qualified individual we have in that position, the better. I don't understand the logic in reducing it. Finally, the issue will come up within our own office. We were debating and throwing around the concept of when the Inspector General would issue subpoenas to entities that are not underneath the county umbrella. Certainly, we expect the county, if the Inspector General was to even request public records, to have a complete handover of those public records. If they want to issue a subpoena, we don't have a problem with it. We just think that perhaps there may be a legal issue if, in fact, they attempt to start subpoenaing entities that do not fall within the county umbrella, county employees. And that may be an issue that we just want to put on your radar that needs to be explored legally, whether that's an appropriate exercise of the authority of the Inspector General to subpoena records from outside agencies. And additionally, we are having a tough time thinking of an instance where you'd be subpoenaing an outside entity's records where it probably wouldn't fall within the criminal umbrella. And again, we just think that may be a problem in the future. Again, those are my thoughts and concerns. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Okay, the final speaker is Ms. Liu.
Good afternoon. I guess I will be considered the most not qualified person to talk about things like this. But believe me, Judge Adrian can prove that I have been diligently attending all the meetings to learn as much as possible. For example, I learned, Ms. Tarter, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like on the state level they do have some regulations on who can contribute or how old or how much, including one thing I learned, it's like a 7-year-old can contribute money to elections, to campaigns. However, we know most of the 7-year-olds are probably still debating they want to eat a broccoli or choose a chocolate cake or which video games they want to play, those type of things. If they can really make a good choices to know whom they should contribute. For example, like people like you to donate money for you can do a good job for everybody. That will be great. But in that case, the question will go back to how come Inspector General, this entity, even you want that to be independent source for investigation, but they still don't have designated fundings. So I think there's still something missing there. Like the other gentleman is saying, we still have lots of things to consider. I started coming to that meeting, that's because I was hoping there are certain things can be improved, but of course I'm a little potato here, so I can only think about little things like OHS or RTA. Now, of course, this meeting has no way to decide because those are little things down there. However, if we straighten out the government, the core part of it, and all those things will have a better chance to be improved. Please consider these resolutions because they will be very helpful. Sure, RTA, the manager is still controlling the board. OHS still don't hear homeless people's input to decide what kind of service should be offered, but still, we are still moving on, and we need to put our efforts all together. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. No other?
No, Madam Chair.
At this time, we'd like to ask the Honorable Ronald Adrian to come forward. He is the chair of the Charter Review Commission, to address the final report submitted by the Commission. And council members, on page 21 of the agenda packet is the recommendations. Thank you for your presence today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the chair, to the members of the committee, and to the council. Please allow me to say once again what an honor it has been to be able to perform this civic responsibility. I'm pleased to report to you that ours was a hardworking but harmonious group that had high-minded objectives that they kept firmly in hand, but they also kept their feet firmly on the ground as we looked at the matters that were placed in front of us. As our first order of business, we conducted a review of the work completed by our predecessor, the 2013 Charter Review Commission. And following that review, we determined that it was unnecessary to revisit topics that they had addressed, except in those instances where some additional new information warranted a fresh look. Beginning in October of 2017, the Commission held 12 regular meetings, plus one community-wide meeting out in the community itself, and solicited written proposals for change from both the public and key community and county stakeholders. Approximately 20 individuals and public stakeholders chose to appear before us and to offer their testimony, ideas, and suggestions for charter amendment. With that input, the Commission decided to focus its primary attention on a number of new issues while subjecting both new and throwback issues to an intense vetting process. We accomplished this process by establishing and adhering to an effective set of operational procedures that included timetables, guidelines, regular and specially set meetings, and criteria for reviewing proposed recommendations. The criteria used for identifying successful proposals included: was the proposal evaluated by the prior Charter Review Commission process? If so, did the current proposal present new information or conditions that were not previously considered by the prior review? Did the new proposal clarify the charter in some way, either by clarifying language or clarifying purpose? Was the subject matter of the proposal best handled by amending the charter as opposed to enacting an ordinance? Did the proposed amendment contribute to more effective government? Are the powers and opportunities for county government appropriately increased by the proposed amendment? In the end, the Commission concluded that only the 4 proposed recommendations contained in its report before you warranted your further consideration for placement on the ballot. Therefore, the 4 charter recommendations that we present to you today are as follows. Amendment 1, that the roles of the Personnel Review Commission and the Department of Human Resources be reconciled. The rationale for this change resulted from recognition that the lines of authority and jurisdiction between these two vital county entities in many instances was blurred. This amendment originated as a collaborative effort between the county's Department of Human Resources and the county's Personnel Review Commission. The HR department and the PRC had initially separately come before the commission to present proposals to amend Article 9 of the charter. Both agencies identified charter provisions where the delineation of the roles and responsibilities of each agency were insufficiently defined. To the credit of all involved, HR and PRC agreed to join their proposals into a single amendment, resolving a number of interpretive differences in the process. The Commission would like to commend the diligent work of both agencies to you, which is why it recommends that Council place this amendment on the ballot. Amendment 2, that the county charter's language specifically authorizes the county council to regulate campaign finance issues. This recommendation originates from a belief held by the members of the commission that the role that money plays in our election process locally, nationally, and regionally has become to a large degree, much too large, and warrants the close attention of those who represent us. It is our considered view that in the current political climate that we find ourselves, much of the citizenry has lost faith in the electoral process. We agree with the proponents of this recommendation that the lack of specific authority for the people's representatives at the county level to regulate the manner in which candidates conduct their campaigns does nothing to diminish a widely held perception that electioneering is out of control. This recommendation aims to restore at least some of the trust by acknowledging the problem and by allowing the voting public the opportunity to voice their level of concern through the exercise of their votes. If the recommendation is accepted by the council and adopted by the people, it will provide those elected officials closest to the electorate in county government, that would be the members of county council, the specific authority to take any and all appropriate legislative actions to address campaign abuses as they see them. This recommendation provides county council with a broadly generalized but specific grant of authority to act in the area of campaign regulation. By design, the nature and timing of the specific remedies that council might consider should the recommendation be placed on the ballot and thereafter passed by the electorate is left entirely to the county council in the exercise of its sound discretion. Amendment 3, that the county's charter specifically reference and address the status and power of the office of the county's Inspector General. The Commission recommends that the County Council amend or place on the ballot an amendment to include the position of Inspector General in the charter. We believe that the office of IG should be a mandatory feature of county government and that the inclusion of the IG in the charter accomplishes that purpose. It is our position that including the IG in the charter language serves to protect the IG from the type of politics that would be an impediment to the effective discharge of the duties of that office. A charter mandate gives the IG's office a level of independent stature and clout and makes it clear that the IG is the chief ethics officer of the county. As further protection from politics, we also included in the recommendation provisions for the IG's term of office to be staggered from that of the county executive, and that the IG's removal may be accomplished only for good cause shown and only by the vote of a supermajority of county council following a hearing where the IG is afforded due process protection. Finally, our recommendation is that the charter guarantee that the IG is provided, the charter should guarantee that the IG is provided the financial resources and investigatory tools necessary to perform the functions of that office, by which we mean a reasonable and dedicated budget, as well as the power to issue subpoenas. Amendment 4, that technical modifications be made to the county's charter language concerning the county's internal audit policies and procedures. This issue was brought to the Commission's attention at the 11th hour by the county's Director of Internal Auditing. This amendment provides greater flexibility for the Department of Internal Auditing to adopt and implement its mission. In particular, the amendment achieves the following. First, it provides the Department of Internal Auditing discretion to bill departments as they are audited. As an agency primarily supported by the county's general fund, the biennial budget process serves as a more structured method to manage the Department of Internal Auditing resources rather than through chargebacks. Director Swaysgood has indicated his department will still be bill audited services to the agencies that are supported by non-general fund revenue to preserve general fund resources whenever practical. 2, it provides the Department of Internal Auditing flexibility to adopt the auditing standards of either the United States General Accounting Office or the Institute of Internal Auditors, American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. Current charter language puts the department in the tenuous position of complying with 2 standards. Although they are similar, they are different. These 2 standards are independently published by separate organizations and could realistically diverge in the future. This amendment would allow the department to remain in charter compliance by adopting a single set of internal standards in the event conflicts or inconsistencies arise between these 2 independent publications. As a body, we discussed whether a matter as technical as this was properly within our purview. We ultimately concluded that because it was deemed to be so by the original drafters, and since years of experience had proven the current methodology inefficient and cumbersome, it was in fact appropriate for our review, and hence we make the recommendation for change. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your confidence in us. Thank you for the opportunity to serve you and our community. Members of the commission are present today, and I'd ask that they stand so that they can be recognized. And we stand ready to field any questions that you might have about this work.
Thank you, and we certainly do appreciate you as serving as chair and the commission for all your hard work. We have all know of the hard work that you have done. Many have attended many of your sessions, and the good work is before us. So thank you for your time. I will ask the clerk to, or do we ask for questions to the judge? Ask questions to the judge? Is there, all right. Is there anyone that has a question to our, given the amount of work? Yes, go ahead.
Not dying to ask a question, but we obviously had presentations from the county prosecutor with some suggested, what sounds to me to be some elements are technical items. Did you have a chance to see the memo that he presented, and I don't know if you have a copy of it.
Yeah, I got a copy of it today when I came in. I had a chance just to briefly review it. You know, there are some things in there that certainly I think have some merit. I wouldn't disagree with the vast majority of the points that he wants to make. If we had gotten it a little bit earlier, I think that we actually would have incorporated some of those things into the proposal. But I don't think that the passage of the recommendation that we have made prohibits you from considering, you know, whether or not those things are appropriate for the final iteration.
Okay, I just want seeing how the opinion was freshly presented, and you're here, Your Honor, and so I thought, well, what better way to merge those two concepts up there?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Like I said, it's clear to me that a lot of thought was put into it by the county prosecutor's office, and there are some good points that have been raised.
And then my only other question was that you in your review process, you had started with the old Charter Review Commission and looked at those items and either gave them credit or continued on, because IG was part of that. There were some that came forward to this council, and we actually voted either to put them on the ballot or not. So they warranted enough to get all the way through the previous commission, but they didn't make it through your commission. So they had enough merit to get through previous, got to this body, did not make it on the ballot, but were sufficient to at least get before. What was the consideration as to why those items did not make it through, that had made it through from prior commission?
Well, our thought process was that those things had been vetted, that that information had been presented to the council, that there was no time limit placed on the council as to when or if it was going to act on those matters, that as far as we were concerned, those were still live balls, that if council chose to, they could go back and they could pick them up. If we didn't have anything new to add to the information that you already received, we didn't believe that it was appropriate for us to go back and look at it again.
So it would be your belief, and I'm going to try to put words in, that anything was presented and maybe was voted down is still theoretically before this council then?
When we looked at it, there were some things that you had voted down. There were some things that you put on the ballot, and there were things that had not been acted on. So as far as we were concerned, all of those things were still in front of you that had not received a positive recommendation because of the fact that that's really in your purview.
Okay, very good. That's an interesting way to look at it. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councilman Gallagher.
Judge, thank you. Thank you for your service. Actually, it was 19 years ago, and I don't think you remember me, but I was doing one of my last papers in college on seniors and violence towards seniors, and you were the only judge that took the time and set me straight and put me in the right direction, and I thank you again. I don't expect you would remember that, but I remember it because it was so helpful. And I know this is last minute, but putting forward the IG without the recommendations of the prosecutor, and you saying that there were things that you probably would incorporate, are we then moving forward something that isn't ripe to move forward, or are you suggesting that in some fashion those be incorporated down the road as opposed to right now?
Yeah, you know, I mean, as I said, I just got a chance to take a brief look at the matters that were there today, and so my cursory review suggests that there's some merit to that, but it's also my understanding that what we put in front of you now are merely recommendations, that you don't have to adopt our recommendations as they're presented. You don't have to adopt them at all. You can modify them in any way that you think is appropriate before you decide to place them before the public. And so I would think that if there is some desire on the part of this body to do a deeper dive or to have some additional conversation with the prosecuting attorney or with the IG, that those would be appropriate things for you to do.
I just think if we have an opportunity to put something better forward that all could agree on. And I'm not in a position to make that judgment, being a layperson, not a person of the law, but all other members involved are. And I certainly would like to know what your thoughts are regarding those. And I just don't know if time is on our side with that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there were most of the things that I saw just quickly, because I only looked at it for about 5 minutes. But most of the things I saw, I didn't fundamentally disagree with. There were a couple of things that I'm not sure that would be the direction that I would go in. But for the most part, I think that all of it has, that there's reason for you to think about all of it.
I believe there is an opportunity beyond today's meeting that we can amend at the council meeting. So we can pass this today as it's written, and then if there is between now and then some desire to want to amend, we have the opportunity to do that. It is unfortunate that we just got this today. All of us are just now reading about it today after months of your deliberation among your commission. But that is what's before us, and I would ask that if there is any considerations, we do have time at our council meeting to amend if that's what any of our council members desire to do.
Yeah, we did have the benefit on, I think, 2 or 3 occasions to have representatives from the county prosecutor's office come to our meeting. So I would have been really happy to have this input for our consideration during the course of our deliberations. We would have given it all due diligence.
Thank you. Yes, Representative.
Through the chair to Council President Brady, is there a way that we could possibly, I know the judge just got him 5 minutes, and he's kind of like the clock is ended for the Charter Review Commission, but could he take some time, a couple days, to look over what was presented by the prosecutor, just to let us know if some of those ideas were talked about in Charter Review Commission?
I guess what we could do or what we couldn't do, but there's some things we just have to.
Excuse me, Mr. President. Could you speak into the mic?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Excuse me. It seems to me, since you're asking me directly, this work has been going on since last fall. The idea that we're going to stop doing what we're doing for any reason, because it is not uncommon for people to come to us late in the game and want significant changes. I'm not saying, again, I've only looked at this once myself, but like some of the other issues in front of us, either we have the time to actually have a debate and vet out these issues, which was the job of the commission, or we don't. And I think it's unfair for the council to be asked to take the time over the next few weeks to re-debate all of these issues. If a councilman, in my opinion, has an intense interest in one of these charters, wants to be involved, wants to draw up some kind of an amendment, and try to put it before the council, then I think that would be appropriate. But no, I don't believe that we should be, pausing what we're doing. We need to go forward and work with everybody involved, including the advocates of these charter amendments, as we have planned to do for months. We've been on a schedule. I mean, they've been on a schedule. We've been on a schedule. We've done and we are doing what we're supposed to do, and that's what we're going to do, as far as I'm concerned. I think that's what we should do. I wanted to ask if either the law department or if Mike, because he's worked, as you know, not only sat on the charter, but worked very closely with helping shape these charter proposals, and has anything to add to what I've said in terms of procedure, because I'm reacting to the councilwoman's question.
Certainly. Thank you. Thank you, Council President. Just a reminder, and this was true the last time the Charter Review Commission met and submitted its recommendations. The charter calls for the Charter Review Commission to submit its recommendations by July 1st, and then the council actually has an affirmative obligation to vote on those amendments up or down within 60 days of that submission. So for all intents and purposes, by the end of August, council needs to vote up or down each of the 4 charter amendments that have been recommended, and that's that's built into the timeline because the filing deadline for the November ballot is in early September. So in order to get anything on the November ballot, whether it's one of these amendments or some other proposal, that amendment or that vote would, believe would have to take place, I think September 6th is the filing deadline. We can confirm that. But the last council meeting, regularly scheduled council meeting at this point before September 6th is the August 7th meeting, which is why we're going through this process now. So that I just want to remind everybody, if there are proposals or amendments that people want to consider, as with last time, how that would operationalize would be council would need to take a vote to vote down the proposals that have been submitted and then reintroduce a separate piece of legislation to place an alternative proposal on the ballot.
Madam Chair. Oh, go ahead.
Yes, go right ahead.
I just want to follow up. So let me be clear. You guys have done great work, and we shouldn't go back. That's not what I'm saying. I just want to be able to know from the commission, because I wasn't able to attend all the sessions. I did attend some of them. Were any of these proposed, just from my thought, any of these proposed recommendations that just came before us, were they discussed anywhere already in your session? So I would know if they're new, because when you're doing a Charter Review Commission, you're all over. You talk about a lot of things. So that just to be clear, that's what
I'm seeing these things for the first time today.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to follow Councilwoman Conwell's question, and you've only had a few moments to look at it just as we have. And what I took from that is, did they bring any of these to you during the process and they are now being somewhat relitigated at this moment? Or has the prosecutor chosen not to participate in your portion and bring them to the table now through the public forum moment, which is available here? And I may not be saying that in the best way, but I just want to get a sense of what the prosecutor was attempting to, when they were attempting to present this. Did they share it to you previously at all as you look at these 6 points? Or is this the first time any of us are seeing the prosecutor's concerns about the charter amendment?
With regard to these 6 points, this is all news to me.
Okay.
As I said, the prosecutor's office did have representatives who came and sat and were helpful to us, during the time that we were trying to decide what we were going to review, and I appreciated that. But as it relates to these items that are contained in this document, this is really the first time I've laid eyes on them.
Could I just as a comment, I think the hard work that you've done deserved this council's serious consideration in recognition of what this body has done over the long period of time you've had, and for my thought, I will weigh these amendments as I get a chance to digest them and see what merit I see in them as well, given they were brought at the public comment time and not during the several months that have preceded.
I understand. Yes, President Brady.
I want to make sure we don't get too far away from regular order here.
Yes.
But I just wanted to, because I hadn't when I first spoke, and trying to respond to the councilwoman, we appreciate the work that the charter's done, and we know it's done a lot of work, and it's spent a lot of time doing that, and we appreciate all the people who have participated in that, who gave presentations before the charter, and all the work that went on into all of this. There was a comment made earlier about, well, the next Charter Review Commission is not for quite some time. But one thing to remember is, I would hope, is that the council, we have the authority to put a charter change on the ballot anytime we want to. I mean, at the appropriate time, and we have. We didn't stop after the commission's report years ago. We put some things on the ballot. 2 years later, we put some more things on the ballot. In fact, we lost one, and we came back to win it. And as it's turned out, I think history's proven us to be, and the councilman here in particular, proven to be correct in their assessment of that particular amendment having to do with the Internal Audit Commission. So this is not our only opportunity to do anything. Any councilman can introduce legislation, introduce a charter amendment change, amend legislation. We have the authority to do these things. We are required by charter to have a charter commission, just as the city and just as others do, on a regular basis to review the charter, and I think that's well and proper, but I don't want us to act like we're going to miss the last train out of Clarksville here. I mean, we have an opportunity to do what we want when we want to do it. We were elected to do that.
Last to speak. Oh, still more? Okay.
Yeah.
Councilman Schrein.
Thank you. I think it's universal. You can see the recognition of thanks for all the efforts that you and the Charter Review Commission did to go forward. Mr. King, when you were talking about this and going through the history, on the last, and you went through the example that if we don't adopt this as exactly as written, then our only choice is up or down. It doesn't mean that we're throwing out the concept of it. How many of the items that came from the first Charter Review Commission went to the ballot that had minor changes because we had to do this exact scenario that we're talking about? And I think that the judge is clearly indicated that they have merit to at least some of these 6 items.
Yeah, if my recollection is serving me correctly, I think in 2013, council ultimately sent 4 items to the ballot. I believe either 1 or 2 of them were verbatim the proposals from the Charter Review Commission, and then either 2 or 3 of the others were tweaked in some way. Some more substantially than others, but were resubmitted as alternative.
And that was my recollection, that half or more than half had some tweaks because things happen. And just because something comes up to the 11th hour, if it's the right thing, it's still the right thing to do. So I hope my colleagues would look at it not necessarily as did it come in at the 11th hour, which of course it did, but does it have merit is really the issue, and we have to make that decision sometime between now and September 6th. So we do have, even though we feel as though we're in a rush, we really do have some time out there, and we're making a decision that is tantamount to changing the constitution of the county is what we're doing here. And even if it means merits, and I'm not going to suggest the president of council when he calls our meetings, but if it was so paramount, we clearly have time to have a short meeting if we needed to between now and September 6th if we found that was in the best interest of good government. So that's what I recall, that half to more than half had some tweaks in them because it's human nature that things can get better. Thanks.
Any other comments? Go right ahead.
Mine will be very brief. As we were acknowledging people, I know that this young lady was not a part of the commission, but she clerked and did a wonderful job. So I'd like to acknowledge Janae Holly as we sit here and go through these efforts, because I think that we often overlook some of the people that are doing some of the more intense labor. So I just wanted to note that Janae Holly also deserves some thanks and recognition. So that's my comment.
Thank you. You're absolutely right.
If I have a moment, personal privilege, I want to reiterate and underscore the work that Janae did on our behalf, and the fact that a lot of these things wouldn't have gotten done but for her diligence. At one point, she was having some issues with one of her children, and she was off the site, and yet and still, when we needed something done, she didn't hesitate, to take some time away from, things that I think priority-wise were a higher priority to make sure that we got what we needed. So I'd like to publicly, also thank her for the work that she did on our behalf.
Very good. Thank you. Councilman.
Thank you
Simon.
for the service of the Charter Commission and Janae, who's been promoted into a different position at the county and highly deserves that. So in terms of the process, I am interested in proposing at least 1 or 2 amendments to the IG, and what I understand is there'll be time to do that if I get something together for the council to consider. Is that correct, Council President, through the chair? Yeah, there's time. I fully support this as my name is written, but I did have some questions which we can talk about why the qualifications were altered. We spent significant time getting this department together as a new council body to address what was going on, and I'm curious why the author would eliminate an attorney at law, and I appreciate the prosecutor bringing that forward because I didn't see that was done when I was reading through this, because I took it for granted that, of course, the IG should be an attorney, and we did spend so much time as a council body putting together the qualifications, endless hours and weeks for this particular office. I don't think anything's taken as much time as the IG from the beginning of this new county government.
I would agree, yeah.
Yeah, so I think this deserves time and perhaps a couple amendments, which I think is appropriate, and I appreciate the prosecutor's insight on a few of these terms.
Understanding the process, in order to do that, we would have to vote this down, this particular IG, and then rewrite the legislation in order for us to make those changes. Am I right, Mr. King?
That's correct, yeah.
And if that sounds like a barrier that's too high, I don't think it's not. I don't think it is. I think it's, as long as we're here in the room and we're discussing it and we know exactly what we're doing and what the procedure is, that should, as long as everybody is well informed about it, satisfied with what the information they have, that we shouldn't be too concerned about the process of what we need to go through to get this the way we want it.
Everyone has that understanding? Yes, Councilman Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I have to agree with my colleague, Councilwoman Simon's comments on that specific piece of a potential amendment there. The fact that anybody's looking at constitutional issues, dealing with privacy and search and seizure and things of that nature, I think it's just essential to the office itself. And I want to thank the prosecutor for bringing that to our attention in this instance. So again, Councilwoman Simon, I'd be happy to work with you on any particular amendments to that, dealing with that. And I also do think the experience matters. They have requirements, as you know, judge for judge, a number of years practicing, that sort of thing. And I think that should be part and parcel of this office as well. I think experience matters in this instance. So appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. I think we've had enough discussion. We have an understanding of perhaps of where we're going. So thank you for your testimony, and we'll proceed.
Thank you.
I think we will drop down, though, to the C on the agenda. So, Clerk, will you please read item R2018-0142 into the record?
Resolution number 2018-0142, providing for the submission to the electors of the County of Cuyahoga an amendment to Article 11, Section 11.04 of the County Charter to provide the Department of Internal Auditing discretion to bill departments for the cost of conducting audits and in adopting auditing standards.
Is there discussion? Mr. King, would you like to add anything to that resolution?
No, only to the extent that I want to make sure you know I'm available to answer questions if there are concerns about the proposal. This one in particular, I think, is relatively self-explanatory. I think Judge Adrian did a good job of, it's a very simple two-part amendment. So again, I'm happy to take any questions and just want to make sure you know I'm available to provide response.
Madam Chairperson?
Yes.
I do appreciate the fact that the judge explained this and that it's relatively simple. I don't think that it'll hurt for Mr. King to go over it one more time.
All right. If you would do that, we would appreciate it.
So basically, this amendment does two things. First is currently the charter requires that the Department of Internal Auditing develop a schedule of department audit fees, which, and it uses the word shall be billed to each department as it's audited. So I think what was originally envisioned was that you'd have this independent internal audit department that would conduct audits internally and then bill departments, which would then reimburse them. The way it's worked in practice over the last few years is that the council actually appropriates a budget for the Department of Internal Auditing. It's more stable, it's more predictable than doing chargebacks. And so in a lot of instances, the department doesn't really need to charge back departments, especially general fund departments where it would ultimately be coming from the same funding source. So the first change would be simply to give the department discretion to charge departments for chargebacks. And again, there may be certain circumstances in which that still is appropriate if they're auditing a department funded by some other special revenue fund, that they could be charged back that special revenue fund, for example. And then the second amendment to this, or second change in this amendment, relates to the auditing standards. The charter currently requires the Department of Internal Auditing to guide their audits through standards established by both the U.S. General Accounting Office, developed by the Comptroller General of the United States, and professional standards of the Institute of Internal Auditors, American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, and their generally accepted auditing standards. And I believe and I know Director Swaysgood is here. He can answer more specific questions related to what actually that means. But what was, I believe, discussed at the Charter Review Commission meeting where this item came up was there are small differences and inconsistencies, and so the department could be put in a situation where they're in a catch-22 where they can't logistically comply with both standards. So this would basically require them to comply with one or the other, and it would be up to the audit committee to establish what those standards are.
All right. Is there any discussion on what was just presented? All right. Hearing none, I'd like a motion to refer this item to full council for second reading.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Hearing opposed? None? It has been approved. Thank you. All right, we'll move on. Clerk, please read Resolution 2018-0140 into the record.
Resolution number 2018-0140, providing for the submission to the electors of the County of Cuyahoga an amendment to enact Article 15 of the County Charter establishing the Agency of Inspector General and to provide for the appointment, removal, qualifications, and the powers and duties, including access to county information and subpoena power of the Inspector General.
Yes, go right ahead, Mr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, as the judge stated, this amendment effectively memorializes the Agency of Inspector General into the Charter. It's currently only enacted through council ordinance. Basically, what this amendment does is it establishes the powers and duties, jurisdiction, qualifications, appointment and term, removal, vacancy, access to county information, that's internal information, and then subpoena power, which would grant the Inspector General to issue subpoenas to compel the attendance of witnesses and the production of papers. And I know there were a number of issues raised by the prosecutor's office, and I only saw them again myself today. I'm happy to respond sort of as best I can, but the fundamental purpose of this legislation was to memorialize that. And I know Councilman Miller was the original sponsor who brought this before the Charter Review Commission. So I know he may have something to say in terms of some of the intent behind certain provisions.
Thank you. And we have had some lengthy discussion on this topic. Councilman Miller, would you like to say a few words?
Madam Chair and my colleagues, first I would like to take this opportunity to express my praise and thanks to the Charter Review Commission for their outstanding work. They put forward an excellent combination of being receptive to everybody's input and also doing their own thinking to bring forward these amendments. This amendment is actually the result of a 6-year effort. It contains the thread of the work that's been done on this previously, even before the first Charter Review Commission, and then the first Charter Review Commission recommended language, which was then a couple of variants were considered by the council, and it was further developed and amended. So a lot of study and work has gone into this. But basically it has three primary purposes. One is to create the permanence of the Inspector General's office by incorporating it into the Charter with provisions that guarantee its independence. Secondly, providing for access to internal information, and third, the provision on subpoena power. So I would like to take a couple of minutes and give you my thoughts on the prosecutor's recommendations. I appreciate the time taken and the suggestions made, and my comments are regarding the first two items, the investigatory authority being limited and the notification of a violation of law is concerned. Our intention from the beginning with all of these charter amendments is that the charter is a very basic document, and you want to include in the charter the fundamental principles that put forward the basics, and then leave the rest to ordinance. And this is done with almost all of the provisions that are in the charter. As the prosecutor pointed out, the provisions that he requests are already in the code. The code provisions do not conflict with the proposed charter language. So I don't believe that it's necessary to add them to the charter language. The intent is to keep the charter language brief and limited to basics. In regard to item number 3, the issuing of advisory opinions, I believe that there is an appropriate place for Inspector General advisory opinions. We've been using them throughout the new government, and going to the Ohio Ethics Commission is a time-consuming and more difficult process. The Inspector General turns these opinions around quickly, and so I believe there's a time and a place for it, but if we decided that the IG should not issue advisory opinions, again, that could be incorporated by ordinance and does not need to be and probably should not be in the charter language. Regarding item number 4, appointment by neutral entities, I'm actually not opposed to this suggestion. It would be a larger departure from what we've done in the past, and we could consider it. But I also do believe that the provisions that the judge pointed out that provide for the Inspector General's independence, namely confirmation by the council, having a set term of office rather than being at will, having a term that's staggered with the county executive's terms, and having a very high bar for removal. I think these items create independence, and so I think the language is also fine as written. As far as item 5 on the minimum qualifications, our intention is that the Inspector General should be of the very highest quality that it's possible to achieve. And I don't think you achieve that by setting very high formal qualifications that limit the pool of applicants that you can get when there's an opening. It's better to have minimum qualifications and be able to get a large number of individuals to choose from. And I do believe that a person who has years of experience as an accountant or an auditor or some other position where they carefully review performance against standards could be qualified for this position. They and they would hire attorneys. I don't think everybody has to be an attorney. So I'm good with the provision as written, but if some of my colleagues find it a sticking point, I don't want it to be a deal breaker. So I can live with an amendment, but I think it's fine as written. As far as item number 6, the question of to what extent the county under its charter can regulate the behavior of citizens who are not county employees is not settled law and has not been tested, and particularly in the case of persons or entities doing business with the county. I think doing business with the county creates a nexus that would create a high probability that the Inspector General's authority in this area would be affirmed if challenged. So I believe that language is fine as written. So in summary, I do support the language as written by the Charter Review Commission. I believe it was thoroughly studied and is a high quality amendment, but I'm open to a couple of amendments if people feel strongly about them. Thank you.
Yes, Councilman Schron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that this charter gets to the core of where a lot of us from the very beginning wanted an independent IG. Those of us who spent time in the military know the value of an independent IG and the significance that can mean to a thorough investigative status. I also believe that we will end up having to defend any of these provisions through the good offices of the county prosecutor should any of these come into question. So that's ultimately, I think, one of the places where we need to be seeking out if there's a legal opinion on a particular item. As much as I respect my colleague's point of view as far as whether it'll stand legal challenge, I would much rather at this point defer to where we ultimately are going to have support for that. I think that we heard from the chair of the commission that he saw merit in these items without getting specific. So I think that we clearly need to be moving in a direction for inclusion of some of these items, if not all. And as I'm sure my colleague Ms. Simon, we were both marking down, add this one, add this one. Why did we lose qualifications, things of that nature? Those are items that I was making a running list as I was going down through hearing the presentation. So I too was preparing to make an amendment, and I will work in concert, and hopefully we'll be in agreement with that. And ultimately, I do think that it has real value to get the opinion as to the legality of support for an item through the person, through the offices to which they will be the ones charged with defending a charter review position should it ever be challenged in court.
Anything else? All right, Mr. King, if I may ask, sure. I would like to make a motion to move this out of committee for second reading consideration with the understanding that there will be a new resolution introduced by some council members to incorporate some of the recommendations discussed. Is that a procedurally, do I have the ability to do that without voting this down?
Yes. Any recommendation that comes from this committee could go to council for reading. Again, council will have to take an action up or down on this amendment as it's currently drafted, but it is the council's prerogative to introduce an alternative amendment if it so chooses. And I just, because I forgot earlier, our Inspector General is also here if anybody has any particular questions about the operational or logistical impacts of any of these provisions. I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that he is available to speak as well.
Yes, Councilman Schramm.
Only because you raised his name in the course of this. Did he have a chance to review these 6 points prior to this? Is anybody aware?
Councilman Schramm, through the chair. I just saw this for the first time this afternoon as I walked in, and I think I spoke for 60 seconds, maybe 90 seconds with Prosecutor O'Malley. And so I'm not here as an advocate, but I can provide information or provide any thoughts or reactions if that can be helpful as this committee goes forward.
Okay, I just was curious whether you had reviewed them, and as we heard from the chair of the commission, he felt that there was merit to some of this material. I'll ask you the exact same question.
So sitting here in the audience, I have reviewed them and I have a few thoughts if those will be helpful to this committee's consideration. I guess my first thought is our democracy actually works at this level. I mean, it's really amazing. So I want to thank Prosecutor O'Malley, and I want to thank all of you for the time today, and I want to thank the League of Women Voters and Judge Adrian and the Charter Commission, because it's pretty remarkable what we do. With respect to the specific recommendations provided by Prosecutor O'Malley, with respect to number 1 and 2, I agree with Councilman Miller that these are absolutely substantively good things, and I completely agree that the investigatory authority of the IG should be limited to particular goods, and that's in our ordinance. And so whether it goes into the ordinance or whether it goes into the charter, that's really up to, I think, the council to decide whether it's more appropriate as ordinance or as charter. Similarly, with respect to the current requirement that we notify appropriate authorities if there's reason to believe a violation of the law has occurred, absolutely agree with that. I think the prosecutor is correct, and whether that goes again into the charter or whether it stays in an ordinance, that's something that my office, I think that we are following, because I think it's correct. So again, those are kind of drafting issues. I think there was a sense that we wanted the charter to be simple and not complicated, and I think that is the reference to kind of a broad document, and these ordinances stay in places. With respect to number 3 on advisory opinions, let me try to clarify. We do not have any authority to bind anything with regard to the Ohio Revised Code. And one of the things that we try to do on every one of our ethics opinions is to say our authority goes to interpreting the county ethics code only, and nothing we say is binding on the Ohio Ethics Commission or on the prosecutor's office. But having said that, there's absolutely continuing confusion. And so I think that the prosecutor's point is correct in the broad scheme, which is we issue opinions, which I think are helpful, but then even though every one of them has a disclaimer which says this is not binding on the OEC, and we try to tell people this is not binding on the OEC, they still think that it is a definitive interpretation of revised code. So there's an ambiguity there. I think my office provides a helpful role providing ethics opinions. I'd like to continue to do that, but I'd also like to kind of talk through this acknowledged ambiguity and uncertainty, because I have great concern that I provide an opinion and the person who receives it misinterprets it and then gets themselves in trouble, because the goal is to prevent violations, not to encourage them. So I completely agree with the sentiment. I do want to clarify that we do not issue any advisory opinions with respect to the revised code, just the county ethics code. With respect to with respect to all of this, we're going to do whatever you tell us to do. We're going to execute the office as best we can, and so however you decide to do it, we're going to follow your instructions as passed by the voters there. So if my office or the IG is appointed by a different entity, that's fine. We're good with that. Broadly, it's done differently. The Ohio IG is appointed by the governor, and my office kind of tracks that process. But in other jurisdictions, there are independent entities, and so however you want to do it, I'm good with that. Federal IGs are also appointed by the executive at the federal branch, but again, others are not. Minimum qualifications, however you think is most appropriate or effective. To the extent that I have a strong feeling or thought about my office, the most important thing from my perspective is that we can be effective in our jobs. And that's about information. And so with respect to number 6, with regard to subpoenas, let me say a couple of things. First of all, my office doesn't regulate conduct. We have no remedial powers. We can't fire anyone. We can't prosecute anyone. We can't bring a civil suit. All we can do is investigate and report. So we can't really regulate conduct. But the investigatory power is very important to be able to shine the light. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. And so to get that information, subpoena power is the OEC has it, the Ohio Inspector General has it, most other inspectors general do have it. And I want to be specific in instances where that has already been an issue. So we are investigating from time to time issues. For example, we have joint programs with the City of Cleveland. And in a specific case, there was a person who was in charge of oversight of the program, but she was a City of Cleveland employee, not a county employee. And we were assured, oh, she's going to talk to you. There's not a problem. There's not a problem. Well, when we asked that, she said, well, sorry, I'm not talking to you. So we went to the law director of the City of Cleveland, and she said, oh, yeah, we're going to take care of this. This will happen. They did some legal review, and they said, we can't make this person talk to you. So that investigation was delayed for over a year because we couldn't subpoena the person, and it wasn't clear that there was anything criminal going on, but it was about waste, fraud, and abuse and how we can run this joint county-city program better. So that's a specific instance where I think it was unfair, frankly, to the entity that we were investigating because it extended the investigation for too long. It also didn't give protection to the City of Cleveland because they just wanted a subpoena so they could, compel this person to testify. They wanted to be supportive. And then with respect to, and then we also have some other issues as well in terms of documents. It's important to be able to get documents from, so there are related to 2 issues. One is former county employees. People quit and then they say, hey, I'm not a county employee. I'm not talking to you. So whatever department they are in, we can't talk to them. We can't compel them to talk. Or similarly, former employees of contractors. Sorry, not interested. So those are important. But I also respect, and I think it's important that there are continuing protections, as there would be for any subpoena, from an unreasonable subpoena. And that's the case in any court, that you can ask for a protective order to avoid anything that's unduly burdensome or inappropriate. And I would just say this, which is, it's my understanding that there are 44,000 currently licensed attorneys in the state of Ohio, 8,000 of which are in Cuyahoga County, every one of which has the authority to subpoena people and documents in cases in which they're involved. And my obligation and my desire is to protect the taxpayers of Cuyahoga County as Inspector General. But when I shifted from being a private attorney to representing the public, I now have less subpoena power. I have no subpoena power than I had previously. So, but again, so those are my thoughts. I do have thoughts. At the end of the day, I'm not an advocate for one way or the other, but I expect to continue to do whatever I can to follow your wishes.
All right, thank you very much. Any other comments? Go right ahead, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. In the event that the IG finds that someone has violated the ethics violation, you indicated that you have no authority to kind of enforce any actions there as far as disciplinary action. But is there any room or any appeals process if they disagree, or if they find that your findings are not in line with what they believe to be, an actual ethical move that they made? I'm just curious.
No, it's with respect to a finding, there isn't an appeal process, in part because there's not a sanction or a remedy. Although, and let me modify that slightly, I can give a reprimand. And then what I do is I send it to HR and say, please take actions in accordance with this report. And they can look at it. They essentially start from scratch and they say, do we agree with it? And so the appeals process would go through the HR side of things.
You're welcome. Yes, Councilwoman.
Thank you. With regard to the subpoenas, I believe we probably need to have that mechanism to get information, and that's such a great point about attorneys being able to access information via subpoenas, and that you in your position wouldn't have that. And just a reminder to my colleagues that the consumer affairs legislation we just recently passed gave subpoena powers to that department to investigate fraud of our residents, and we empowered that department to do that. So it would make consistent sense, especially at this level, to give that same ability, to give some teeth to this department to be able to uncover information and bring it forward to protect our taxpayers.
All right. Sounds like we're there. Well, as confirmed by Mr. King, and it sounds like we all are under agreement, perhaps, that more consideration should be given. I would like to make a motion to move this out of committee for second reading consideration, with the understanding that there may be a new resolution introduced by some council members to incorporate some of the recommendations that were discussed.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none, this resolution is passed.
Madam Chair, may I clarify? Mr. Schron, were you the second? Thank you.
Yes. All right. Clerk, if you may please read for record R218-0141.
Resolution number 2018-0141, providing for the submission to the electors of the County of Cuyahoga an amendment to Article 9 of the County Charter, clarifying the roles and responsibilities of the Personnel Review Commission and the Department of Human Resources to prohibit discrimination on the basis of gender identity expression in county employment, and to provide for the establishment of the unclassified service by general law and council ordinance.
Yes, go right ahead, Mr. King.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, as Judge Adrian said, this is an amendment that was brought before the Charter Review Commission initially as two separate proposals to Article 9 of the Charter. One proposal was from the Personnel Review Commission. I'm going to refer to that as the PRC, the other from the Department of HR. Basically, after that initial proposal, those two initial proposals were submitted, those two organizations decided to sit down and work on a compromise proposal, which ultimately came back to the Charter Review Commission. And what is recommended in this report is basically verbatim what those organizations recommended. And I know representatives of the PRC are here. I'm not sure if anybody from HR is in the room, but they are here if you have specific questions about the thought process behind some of what was developed here. Getting into the weeds a little bit, this amendment is principally about clarifying the roles and responsibilities of these organizations to avoid duplication of efforts and to maximize operational efficiency and accountability. First, it gives the PRC greater oversight rather than more an administrative role. Function for compliance with civil service and other legal compliance. In this role, PRC would review and audit HR operations and would issue reports and recommendations to the county executive and county council. The amendment explicitly states that the PRC is solely responsible for civil service testing for both initial and promotional appointments. I know that's been an issue that's been discussed at length in the council's HR committee, particularly related to classified employees. Third, it requires the PRC to conduct a budgetary analysis prior to the enactment of a change to a classification's pay range. So if a particular class or classification has the pay range changed, then there's going to be a budgetary analysis done just to see, if this pay range moves up or down for a particular reason, how will this affect the county's budget? And then finally, it clarifies HR is responsible for the direct administration of recruitment, hiring, firing, discipline, layoffs, training, benefits, time and attendance, compliance, etc., as well as individual compensation decisions within the classification and salary administration system and or any other rules established by council. And this is something that operationally Human Resources has been doing, but was not entirely spelled out in the charter, and so there's an amendment basically to clarify that point. In addition, this amendment gives council the ability to designate employees as unclassified in addition to those who are unclassified under general law or other sections of the charter. Currently, the charter provides that the classification system is made up by those employees that state law says are to be classified civil service, and that those who are designated under state law to be unclassified are unclassified. This would basically give council the ability to establish new positions that are specifically unclassified and specifically classified. So it gives a little more operational flexibility. Again, the classification system would still be developed through the PRC, and council would most likely be adopting those classifications on their recommendation. And then finally, this amendment provides that the county's HR systems be administered without discrimination on the basis of gender identity or expression. And I want to be clear on this. This isn't a new policy that the county is adopting. Employees are already prohibited from discrimination on or discriminating on the basis of gender identity or expression under both the county's Personnel Policies and Procedures Manual as well as the county's Ethics Code. This amendment merely updates the charter to bring it in line with those pre-existing policies. So that's the meat of the amendment, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Really, just a comment. This has been such a long-running dispute, and there were times when, I think there were threats or considerations of trying to go to the ballot for for a charter change so that one side would win over the other. I mean, it was really looked intractable. So I'm just so happy to see this resolution that going on for several years to be embodied in this charter change, and I just want to compliment everybody who was involved in setting down, being reasonable, and negotiating something out.
All right, any other comments? Yes.
I agree with Council President, and I was in the room for those discussions, and it was heated, and let's seize the moment, seize the day, and I totally support this and get it on the ballot to resolve an ambiguity that existed at the time the charter was enacted. So I'm really pleased, and I'm happy to see that as well, that the gender identity expression will just be consistent with our policies and ordinances and really reflect what's happened since the charter was originally enacted, which always included LGBT, I think, but this just takes it to be consistent with what we're doing at the county. So thank you.
All right. Yes.
I would like to make a motion to refer Resolution 2018-0141 to the full council for second reading.
Thank you. Do we have a second? We have a second? Second. Okay. All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. This has been passed. All right. Madam Clerk, if you would please read for the record Resolution R2018-0143.
Resolution number 2018-0143, providing for the submission to the electors of the County of Cuyahoga an amendment to Article 3, Section 3.09 of the County Charter to empower the council to enact laws governing the election of county officers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment expressly empower council to enact campaign regulations for county officials, including campaign finance, disclosure requirements, age limits, and enforcement procedures. For those of you who were around after the last Charter Review Commission, this is very similar to the last proposal that was recommended by the previous Charter Review Commission. Two important distinctions. One is that last proposal was framed as placing an affirmative duty on council to enact campaign finance regulations. This does not include similar language. This would simply grant authority to the council to enact such campaign regulations if it so chose. And then secondly, it includes an explicit reference related to donor age limits. That was something that was brought up during the commission. Again, it's part of a non-exclusive list of authority that would be granted under this charter proposal, but it was added, I believe, intentionally. So that's basically the gist of the amendment. And again, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Do we have discussion or questions on this? Yes, go right ahead.
Don't we already have authority?
Good question. That is something that we asked as the Charter Review Commission was wrapping up of the law department, and we received an opinion recently that indicates that under the county and council's plenary home rule powers, the council does already have authority to enact campaign regulations because it is part of local self-government. And so this is something council could theoretically do now without a charter change, but this was something that the commission as a whole felt, that council should have specific explicit authority to do so.
Any other? Yes, Councilman Sharon.
I've heard it referenced a few times today. How many 7-year-olds have actually contributed to the last couple campaigns? If it's going to be used as a reference, at least give me some facts.
I don't have that information on me, Councilman.
Do you think any?
I wouldn't know.
Madam Chairperson, we used to have these debates in Columbus, and as many people will remember, and in fact, they got to be absurd debates. There were moves to create campaign finance contribution limits quite often, and those were debated quite often. And there were, the reason we're even discussing what you said is because there were actual amendments that limited the amount of money that 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds could contribute. And part of the way this happened was that people who were trying to pass campaign finance reform campaign limitations were basically trying to ridicule the status quo, being unable to do anything much more about it. So amendments would be offered. Oh, well, shouldn't a 5-year-old only have to be able to give this much money? These were meant to be sarcastic amendments, but they were shot down because the legislature did not want to limit the amount of money a 7-year-old could contribute. Now, we know 7-year-olds don't actually contribute money, don't we? And everybody else does too. But that's the origin of this. It's not anything that's happened here. It's something that was a debate in state government, in state legislature, and probably in many other state legislatures around the country. So that's where the absurdity of it comes from, Councilman, is that these were actual debates in Columbus.
Well, I don't doubt that there are some bodies that maybe have debates over issues of that nature. So we'll leave that stay in Columbus. My concern was that it's been referenced at least, I think, 2 or 3 times here in this body just today. And I thought, if you're going to reference that as a fact, or at least a presumed fact that we're trying to protect against, let me know how many times that's occurred, because I think it's kind of a fallacious thing that we shouldn't even be in this body, I guess, to agreement with our council president. During the last our Charter Review Commission, there was an item that came up that was, I think, and I've talked with Mr. Tarter about this, that is directly linked to this same item, and that it was nonpartisan elections. What happened to that? And because you were on the why, if it got through the last time, got to this body, whether it got voted up or down to get on the ballot, why didn't that get linked? Because Mr. Tarter, I believe, I've had discussion with him about this particular charter amendment and why these two were not linked.
So the commission this time around did not get a specific recommendation around nonpartisan elections. We didn't get a proposal. Doesn't mean oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, they did.
I'm sorry.
That body over there recommended
Yes.
it and supported it for
right.
legal women voters.
Apologies.
I know they did because they told me they're going to.
Sorry. No, it was considered. I'm sorry. The commission decided not to take it up early on in the process because there was not. And again, I don't want to speak for Judge Adrian on this front, but I believe the rationale was that there was not new information that warranted an additional look. Again, this was something that the judge said this was something that was considered and recommended by or not recommended by the last Charter Review Commission, and was not really considered or recommended this time around. There was discussion at length, and there's reference in the final report related to the process for vacancy and succession of both council and the executive, and there was some lengthy discussion around how potentially a special election could be held to fill those seats, and there was lengthy discussion around whether or not those should be partisan or nonpartisan. There was not a consensus proposal that the commission could reach. There was a lot of discussion with the Board of Elections around the election calendar, costs associated with holding special elections, and ultimately at the end of the day, there is a recommendation in the final report to revisit this issue at some point, but there was not a specific proposal that came out of the commission.
Well, I can speak first-handedly that this is a very expensive county to run a countywide race in. I can speak personally from that aspect of it and how expensive it is to get your messaging out because it's a very expensive media message, because that's really what campaign financing does. It buys media, TV, print. That's the core of what's being done, and that's why I believe that these two items should be linked together, because of the fact that it is very difficult in this county without spending money to get a message that would go across to 1.3 million people. And so I will not be supporting this the way it's written. Thank you.
Yes, Councilman Simon.
I will not be in support of this charter amendment proposal for reasons I've stated at the commission numerous times. And Ms. Terser brought up the case of Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, which allows for people to self-fund campaigns, to have unlimited funding of their own campaigns under a free speech analysis, which historically in this county has proven to be the case, that people with means are able to self-fund. And until the Supreme Court changes its ruling, I don't believe it's fair to people who don't have the ability to self-fund to be limited, and allow people who do to have an unlimited funding of their own campaign. So until we change the Supreme Court makeup and Citizens United is overruled, which I hope it is at some point, that it makes no sense for us to be trying to make changes here when at the end of the day the Supreme Court has said what free speech is about, and we can't overcome that at this level. So I will not be supportive of this.
Thank you. Yes, Councilman Jones.
I don't support this legislation, this item either. We already have the authority to do. We already have the authority. So it's almost somewhat maybe a missed opportunity for the body to present legislation that genuinely takes us somewhere, that looks at whatever challenges or issues there may be, and presents, at least recommends a solution. I know in the presentation, problem, solution comment was made, but if there's a genuine problem, then take a stab at how do you address, how you present an actual solution. My colleagues have said media is bought and those things, and those challenges we're seeing at the federal level, maybe state, obviously, but at the local city council, and local county as elected officials, in my experience, have not seen those type of issues. I didn't use media.
Run for county.
Well, that's true, and then present something that starts to address if you find issues there. But the legislation doesn't take a stab at it. It simply says what we already have the authority to do. So at this moment, I say no to this legislation as well.
Madam Chair.
Yes, go right ahead.
I first of all want to show respect for people who work on this issue, care about these issues, and are trying to find some way to improve the system that we have. Having been around maybe too long, I've seen a lot of this, and at least the proposal that came before us several years ago, at least was sort of insisting that we do something as part of its proposal, even though it didn't insist exactly what it was we were supposed to do. I would be reluctant to put an issue on the ballot or know what to say about an issue on the ballot that has no content to it at all. And I know that's not the intention. I know the intention is you got to start somewhere. This is where we should start. I respect that. But I don't want to give false hope or some kind of a sense that I'm supporting some kind of reform, which we need, that is not spelled out and perhaps is beyond our authority. I don't want to not be straightforward with the voters about that. If we want to put something on the ballot that will pass legal muster under the current conditions, then I have an open mind to that. And if any councilman, as we all know, any councilman wants to introduce campaign finance reform legislation or something like that that has to do with these issues, we'll take it up just like any other issue. We'll debate it, but that'll take some time. It's a pretty important issue. And if we find a consensus, I'm sure we can make some progress. But I'm not comfortable putting something on the ballot that has no content in it.
Yes, any other comments? All right then. I think because we are required to act on all recommendations from the Charter Review Commission, I'll make the motion to send this out of committee for second reading consideration with the understanding that it may not have favorable support at the full council meeting. You'll second that? President Brady seconds that?
Chair, we might have a roll call on this one.
All right. I would take a roll call. Clerk?
Okay, we have a first by Chairperson Baker with a second by Council President Brady. And Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Hauser?
For clarification, we are voting this out of committee, but can vote as we would like to vote when it comes to full council. All we're doing right now is voting it out of committee.
Yes. Question, if I might.
Yes.
A no vote means it just does not even come out of committee. Would that be? It would stay here and not move any further?
May I ask for Mr. King to give clarification to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is correct. The council can, or the committee can refer items out of committee with favorable recommendation to council, with disfavorable recommendation to council, or with no recommendation to council. So it can send it back with a recommendation or without a recommendation, one way or the other.
If we were to not give it favorable recommendation, does it die at this point in committee?
The charter requires that all of the proposals that are recommended be voted up or down by the full council. So at some point, it doesn't necessarily have to be recommended out today, but it should be recommended out at some point prior to the 60-day window, just so that there can be held a vote up or down.
I understand. It needs to get to full council
Yes.
where we can vote our conscience.
Yes.
Understood.
So we may take the roll call.
Yes, voted out. Ms. Simon?
I'll be a yes. Vote out with disfavorable recommendation.
Ms. Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Tuma?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Schron?
Yes. Followed by Simon's.
Ms. Conwell? Oh, Ms. Conwell, I'm sorry, is absent at the moment. Mr. Jones?
Yes.
And Council President Brady? Motion carries.
All right, motion carries. We have no other resolutions before us. Is there any other miscellaneous business from council? Seeing none, we are adjourned.